This is Lessons Learned, and I'm your host, Matt Kennard, CEO of Better Lesson. Join me as we dig in with visionary state and district level leaders who share our mission to support every K-12 educator in developing the next generation of resourceful, compassionate, and resilient learners. Lessons Learned is brought to you by Better Lesson. Let's get started. Okay, season 2, Lessons Learned. We're really excited to be diving in, and I've had the privilege of talking to a number of folks in industry, whether they're ed techers or folks who are in superintendent state leadership. But there is a role that's near and dear to my heart, which is the principal, right? Because these are the folks who actually have to do the work in the building day in and day out and take such a hard transitional role. Today, I get the opportunity to talk to Chelsea Gallagher, principal of Mount Spokane High School in Washington. And, her leadership has been instrumental in fostering an inclusive, supportive, high-achieving school environment. Her school is a beacon in the state. Her graduation rate under her leadership has increased substantially. Student test scores are up substantially. Engagement has flourished. And she was awarded High School Principal of the Year 2025 by the Association of Washington Schools. Chelsea Gallagher, welcome to the show.
Thank you. That was quite the intro.
Now we gotta hit the intro right. You gotta have that 40 seconds of glory. Well, it's so great to have you on the podcast. This year we've been talking a lot about post-secondary readiness, how we're thinking about rigor, how do we think about orchestrating this great environment, even in like budget uncertainty and a lot going on. So excited to get to talk to a building leader and really understand kind of what has been going on and how that's made you tick.
Thanks. I'm excited to be here and be able to share a little bit of our story. It'll be fun.
Well, before we do anything, one of my favorite questions to ask is, most people don't wake up and say, hey, I'm going to become an educator or a principal. They want to do something else. But you are a principal now. What got you down this journey? What brought you into education?
Well, there's like this vivid moment I have from third grade where we were about to go to like this serious assembly. And our teacher was like, remember, we can't talk. So she gave us some gummy bears and she taught us how to switch the heads on these gummy bears. So now we had multicolored gummy bears and we were supposed to not eat them. We were supposed to like suck on them to keep us quiet. And in that moment, I knew I was going to be a teacher. There was like years and years of me on the first day of school bringing gummy bears to my students and doing the same thing. Yes, rather corny. However, I would argue that like the deeper why for me came from an educator who saw more in me than I saw in myself. I was raised by a single mom who would move any mountain in my way to make every dream possible. But I remember in 9th grade, like being at my friend's house for dinner, and her family was having this meal that in my house we only had on holidays. And I was telling her mom like how delicious it was. And I was like, oh, this is really good. This is way better than the top ramen we were going to have at my house. And my friend was, without missing a beat, was like, top ramen for dinner, really? Her mom came to my rescue. But that was my reality. And I realized that my life was drastically different from the people around me. And while I wanted to be a teacher, I didn't know how to make college happen for myself. We did not have the financial means. I did not have an example of that in my house. And so in later that year, I met my basketball coach, and we called him Coach D. And he just like poured every ounce of himself into me and showed me that anything was really possible. And I really believed that my path to college was through sports. That was gonna pave my way. It was gonna pay for it to happen. But my senior year, second game in, I tore my ACL. And it was just like, oh, there it goes. All my dreams crushed. And I thought everything for me was over. And I remember waking up after surgery, and of course, Coach D was there. And he was telling me about the game our team had just lost. And I started to cry. And he was like, why are you crying? I'm like, well, because it's all over. Like for me, I have no other path. Like I'm just going to try to make it. I can't achieve my dreams. I'm not going to college. Like I won't be able to do it. And he was like, yeah, you can. We just have to find another path. And that man made sure that I knew what FAFSA was. He took me under his wing while I was in college, and I was an assistant coach for him. He just showed me that there was a different way. So yeah, I'm grateful.
It's funny. One of the things, and I've said it on this podcast a few times, the thing, if I could eliminate the most, it would be the fact that for so many people, their path to college has to do with whether or not their parents went to college. Knowing what a FAFSA is, knowing when the deadlines look like, knowing the fact that great schools have financial aid available, right? Like, that's just a asymmetrical information problem. That's not a skilling problem. That's not a you weren't smart enough to go problem. That's a literal asymmetric skilling issue. And so knowing that that's the case, we got to stop that.
Yeah.
Like, we have to be able to do better. We have to be able to communicate. And I love that anecdote because I think it points to that issue with the seriousness with which it should be pointed to.
Absolutely. Absolutely. All doors open.
100%. Well, listen, it feels like these days we finally changed this narrative that we've been having around, if you're not going to 4-year college, then what's the point? If you're not at UW, hopefully not losing in a national college football semifinal. Sorry.
Well played.
You should be, we don't know what to do. And it feels like we've finally gotten back to this idea that we need to have great pathways that align to what students need, pathways that cover 2-year college, 4-year college, associates, wherever else they may go, but also, helping them persist in CTE pathways. As we think about the world as you're seeing as a principal in a building, thinking about the kids who are matriculating through, what are we getting wrong right now? And maybe what are we getting right finally around thinking about preparation for kids for post-secondary?
It's a great question. I think what we're getting right is that we're starting to think about students as their whole being. Who do they want to be? And not just what do they want to do, but who do they want to be? And then how do we take those things that they value in themselves and start turning those into careers and just making space for those meaningful conversations? I would say, what are we getting wrong with that? Well, the reality is the system isn't set up to allow students to explore every potential career available to them. We don't have those means. So we need to think differently. We're thinking about we can't bring every career into our building. So how are we getting our students outside of our building, creating internship opportunities so that they can explore the career interests that they have, despite the fact that we don't have that in our building, and allow them to change their mind. I love that we have a high percentage of kids who are completing 4-year pathways in CTE. But I also love the fact that more and more kids are figuring out that that's not the career I want to go into, and they're not going off to a 4-year and wasting 4 years of money, and finding out 8 years later that, wow, that's not at all what I want to do.
And I didn't finish my degree.
Yeah.
Yeah. But I do have the debt to show for it. No, that's 100. Listen, I couldn't agree with you more, right? The idea should be, how are we helping kids think about the world and give them exposure to the world to make a great choice, right? And the idea that we've built so much, in the best case, expectation, and the worst case, shame around saying, hey, 4-year college isn't what I want to do. That's okay. I think we've got to really think about, really, our goal is to have every student who walks across the stage be post-secondary ready, be capable of doing something that is meaningful to them, that helps them build a life with a living wage and helps them be a great member of their community, right? And that is the point of doing this. It's always been the promise of education. One thing it points to me, and I think you said it earlier, is that interaction with the world is defined around a lot with workforce, whether it is, what do we need kids going to college to actually study and helping give exposure, or what do we need kids doing when they come here? Also important. But I think thinking about that idea of that connection to workforce, both as sponsors of what happens, but also ways to see that mingling of students with externships and opportunities to get out there. How have you thought about that within your own building and what that does for you?
Just trying to build as many partnerships as we possibly can. In our area, we have this organization called Launch Northwest, and their fundamental goal is really about removing the barrier of cost for any student who wants to pursue post-secondary education. It doesn't have to be 4-year, but whatever that looks like for them, whether it's a trade or 2-year, does not matter. And so having that be an option for kids, that they've got this ability that takes that barrier away, and now they're able to dream a little bit, and they're willing to engage in those conversations with our counselors. We have this we I'm a big believer that you hire the right people and you get out of the way, and I cannot take credit for this person that I'm about to talk about because I did not hire him, but our college and career counselor, phenomenal. If every school could have a college and career counselor like we have, we would be changing outcomes across this state, across the nation. Josh Cower is ours, and man, does he make the time and space for kids to really have those conversations. But we also have mentors that they're able to connect with, specifically focusing on kids who would be the first in their family to go to college, or kids from a low socioeconomic background, kids who aren't necessarily seeing themselves as going out and finding a career that really fits their assets. I feel like when we have those partnerships, our options have really become limitless, and that's really what we're trying to do. We've got a community that's willing to lean in and pour into our students, which is really special, and they're stepping up to be those mentors for our kids. We've got colleges in our area, Whitworth, who is willing to have student mentors mentor our kids so that they understand what it's like to be a college freshman, what it's like to persist through college, what it took for them, so that they have these examples if they don't have them in their own lives.
I think that's an amazing opportunity, and that connection to community and connection to workforce. And I think more than anything else, making sure kids understand that people take them seriously, they believe in them, right? And if being a welder is a thing that is like hugely important to you, awesome. Let's figure out how we connect that to something that is long lasting and allows you to do it. If doing X, Y, and Z, or going to 4-year school is what you want, all of those things make sense. How do we actually build those sets of connections and community? And I think you play such a unique role as a principal because you're the executive of your building. You can bring so much of that touch point in. Did you find resistance either internally or in the community as you pushed in this direction?
I think not necessarily resistance. The demand is high, and so finding enough and like enough people to be able to give their time to that partnership has been a little bit of a challenge. But we're learning how to use our staff to help create those partnerships. So like, just because you're an English teacher does not mean that you can't have a conversation with this kid who wants to be a psychologist, for example, or go into construction management. We might have somebody on our staff who has a spouse or an in-law or a really good friend who works in that field that was like, "Ooh, let me get them connected with this person." And so that's been really helpful. But I would say that's been our biggest barrier to overcome, is just finding all of the right people to connect our kids to.
That makes a ton of sense. One other thing that I think is interesting is you're talking about what you think about this external folks, right? You also have to get your kids ready. What's going to feel like a new level of academic intensity, like rigor, because industry is very clear that they want to offer jobs, but they want to offer jobs to people who can successfully persist in that work. And that often means helping people understand that just because someone chose a CTE pathway didn't mean they chose a non-rigorous pathway. In many respects, their day one rigor is going to be even higher than a kid who's moving into a freshman dorm.
Oh, absolutely.
So how do you think about preparing kids? How did you think, how did you think about the matriculation pathways? I know selfishly you've been with Better, Less, and Able for a while, but how did studying those matriculation pathways and patterns help you better communicate that rigor to your students?
We really focused in on 21st century skills.
Yeah.
And so,
Portrait of a graduate. If you're
yeah,
not doing it right now, I'm gonna interject it. If you're not doing a portrait of a 21st century graduate that includes AI, please do it. Please, please, please do it.
love it. Love it. But, here's the question that we asked a lot. Like, why am I going to have to do this down the road? Why do I have to read Shakespeare? Why do I have to take a CTE course? The answer is not necessarily, at least the one that I'm finding to be the most helpful for us, is not necessarily related to just that particular thing. It's not about being able to read and understand Romeo and Juliet in ninth grade, though I'm a big fan. It's not about necessarily having good knife skills and culinary, but it is about developing those 21st century skills. And in doing so, we're building our ability to persist when things are hard, our ability to be critical thinkers, our ability to work as a teammate. And those are the skills that are getting our students hired. And so if we're not focusing on that when we're answering why we have to do something in a high school classroom, then I think we're missing the mark in helping our students to develop themselves as future members of our community who are going to be employed and could potentially be my boss one day, right? Like that's who I want to work for, people with these skills.
One of the things you brought up there, communication, application, right? I mean, it's the same thing that we thought about math and science, right? Like it's not just about did you learn something, it's did you learn how to apply and communicate? Did you get some sense of flexible deployment of the skill? And I like that. And I think being able to almost immediately tie that to something that a kid can see outside of the four walls of their school to be like, oh, man, Ms. Gallagher wasn't kidding. Like, she's actually serious. This is useful and usable. There's a level of we've got to be willing to do some show and tell here to make that a reality. And I think that portrait of graduate point also super salient that you brought up, which is helping kids see like some of these skills, they're so important. And like communication didn't go away.
Yeah. They're not just going to help us get a job. They're going to help us keep a job.
100%. As you think about like changes big and small, and as folks are thinking about, hey, I'm looking at my matriculation pathways. I probably have too many CTE pathways. I know that I'm not putting all my kids through rigor. I'm going to guess in day one, it's a little overwhelming to be like, I don't know how I fix all of this. And my budget's about to get tighter, as we know. What advice would you give to folks who are thinking about doing this work?
Start small. We started this work actually in looking at our data as we connected. We really started with looking at like, ooh, our math data is indicative of the fact that our students are not completing 4 years of math. Like they're dropping out after they get through algebra 2, not dropping out of high school, but dropping out of taking math. And when we talked about rigor and academic intensity, and we're thinking about what are the courses our students are taking and how is that preparing them for what's next, like math is really crucial in a lot of ways. So in the critical thinking that is required, the depth of knowledge, the rigor, it's just all tied together. And so we really focused in there, and it transformed the way we did everything else. And so that conversation led us down the path of registration and intentional registration practices so that students are signing up for courses that, one, every kid would have a stretch course. And the thing about that is we're meeting that kid where they're at. A stretch course is not AP Euro for every student. The stretch course is for that student, what will stretch them to go one step further beyond what they think is possible for themselves. And it doesn't need to be in every subject, just one in their schedule that will push them. And that increased the number of students who are taking math for all 4 years. It helped us think about, well, what do we think are rigorous courses within our school? So then we started adding college and the high school courses, dual credit courses. Then it led us into the world of CTE and how are we viewing CTE as rigorous and how do we fully develop those pathways? Um, so that one change with just focusing on math led us down this whole path that has improved our outcomes for students. And that was one simple thing. And now we do one-to-one registration with every student every year so that they are getting what they need out of their schedule.
I love that you're also pointing out, I think, an important part, right? Which is it's not just the coursework, it's also that communication pathway. And that kids, when they come in ninth grade, don't just drop off a course request and good luck, right? Vaya con Dios. But instead, it's a little more of a, what are we trying to accomplish here? What are we hoping for? What does that look like? And I think that there's something to be said here that makes, a lot of sense, and I think I love the fact that you're pushing in here because I think that we don't do that enough. We don't make that an explicit conversation, but also like explicit teamwork between our groups. And I think that makes a ton of sense. The other group that you have to get buy-in to make this happen, right, is your leaders and your staff in the building. And for those, one of the hardest jobs I've always thought about being principal is once you get done with the hiring and the firing and the budget and the in-local parentis and the are we putting drones in our classrooms, class hallways, and those are serious things that principals are looking at almost every single day. Once you get past the physical plant and safety, you're the instructional leader of your building. It's like job number 34 that we don't talk about. And yet, in many respects, it's the hardest job. Like you are the end-all, be-all instructional leader and coach for your building. How do you think about getting to, first of all, just as a principal, being that support given how many other things you've got going on?
Systems over goals. So you want instructional leadership to be a focus, create a system to make it happen. We can get bogged down in the small fires. And the reality is those fires are important to put out because if we don't put it out, it becomes a whole wildfire and now we're dealing with a bigger mess. But when we can create a system that allows us to focus on the things that need to be a priority, instructional leadership, then we no longer have to say like, ooh, how do I make time for that? Because you're doing it, you've created it. So for us, it's all about being really strategic with our time. For me, I'm very boundaried around if it has something to do with my staff or my students, that has to take place during the time that they're here. I have from 7:20 to 2:50 to get my staff's needs met. Outside of that time, I like that's when I can do all the managerial stuff. My leadership is from 7:20 to 2:50 and I protect that. But we have a system around unit-based instructional evaluations. And so we're really utilizing our professional learning communities to really strengthen those evaluations so that it doesn't feel like a one and done. In the state of Washington, we have student growth goals are a mandatory component to the evaluation system. And I got really exhausted from hearing about, can you remind me what my student growth goal is for the year? Wow, if we're like having to remind them in May what their student growth goal was, it probably wasn't like right in front of them and their data is probably not going to be the thing they're most proud of. So we changed it and we do our full evaluation system within a single unit of study. So during that unit of study, they have their student growth goal. We do both of the 2 or 3, depending on where they're at in the cycle, 2 or 3 observations during that time. It's all connected back to their student growth goal. And then really the power is in that reflective conversation. But all of that time is protected in my calendar for them so that nothing else can pull me away. Now, I'm not going to say that that's perfect because there's once in a while an emergency that gets you pulled away from that. But when you've created a system where for, I would say 90% of the time, that time is protected for them, The staff is really bought into that. And now they know that they can trust you because you're fully engaged in that process and you're in it with them. And because we're doing that as a cycle for every unit, when I'm not physically present for that conversation with their PLCs, they're still having the conversation. And I would say,
Building like
wait,
consistency.
go ahead. Yeah.
No, but you said systems over goals, right? Like, how do I build that consistency into the process? How do I build it so I'm on vacation for a week and I know things will still continue apace the way that they're supposed to? That's 100% the way, and I think that we can all learn a lot when we think about it in that method.
Well, and not everybody's system is going to work for you, right? Like I tell that story and then I get from people like, "Oh, our union wouldn't allow that." Totally get it. So like how do you create your system with whatever parameters you have that you need to be guided by, but create the system because it protects you and then your staff build trust around it and then celebrate the heck out of them. You know, no, our teachers work so incredibly hard to meet the needs of our students, and they deserve to be celebrated. They deserve to be recognized, and that can be systematic too. It's just how are we celebrating?
One of the other things that I love thinking about in that path is how do we support our leaders in buildings, whether it's executive coaching or support. Running PLCs is a skill. Thinking about how you support your instructional leaders is a skill. Thinking about how you do instructional rounds, to think about non-evaluative observation is a skill. Like, are you pouring into these folks with the tools that they need to be able to do that job? And that's just a plug for, it takes 5 years to become an effective principal. And there's a reason that it takes 5 years, and that's not a minor thing. It's a hard job. One other thing I'd love to think about is like, as you've pushed into this idea of operating around career readiness, operating around our pathways, are there things that like some of the romantic notions of education that you've had to give up to get practical?
Yeah, I'm trying to think of like a solid example of one that I've had to give up. Um, I think just really letting go of the idea that within our walls, we're going to be able to meet um, every need of our students. Um, I really view it as my responsibility when a student walks through our doors that we're going to figure it out with them. But the reality is that we can't meet the needs of every student who walks into our building just within our walls. We've got to be willing to reach out and find services that exist outside of our school, within our community. As much as I don't want to lose students to places like a skills center or Running Start because it impacts our overall FTE and our staffing, if that's what's best for that student, I need them to do that. Because that could be the difference for them in terms of whatever their next step is.
No, that makes a ton of sense. And I think being able to credibly communicate that not only to your educators, but for your students to feel that as well and feel like you are both in their corner and able to help. Those are things that are invaluable to them in terms of feeling good about the work and feeling like someone's actually there in that one-on-one consultation or whatever else it may be, caring about the long-term outcome for the student.
Yeah, for sure. But all of that does not prevent us from thinking about how we can improve what we do have available so that we can stop losing our students to those systems, which is actually how we started to move towards more college and the high school courses. We were just seeing so many kids leave us for Running Start. Like, gosh, how do we fix that? Well, we just bring college inside.
Sometimes you got to bring the mountain, and make it possible for them to do that.
Yeah.
I began this podcast asking you what brought you here, and that story was phenomenal. And I also think right now it feels like we can be in this doom cycle of it's tight budgets, it's tough news. We're asking for so much to change and go and do. And What keeps you hopeful? When you wake up in the morning, when you think about what you're seeing, what's giving you hope that we're moving in the right direction?
Man, I feel like you're trying to make me cry. I, uh, I feel like I have a lot of hope, and I think that that stems from having a really solid support system around me. I think being a principal, I can't speak to all of the roles in education, um, but in terms of administration, being a principal is the loneliest I've ever felt in my career.
Amen.
And I have started to figure out how to make connections with other principals who are going through what we're going through, and being willing to reach out to them and call on them and get the support that I need, but also be that system of support for other people. I would say the other thing that brings me hope is that I have a solid team here. Like, I am so blessed and lucky. Our assistant principals are phenomenal. They are in this for the right reasons. Our staff is incredible. And our students are kids. They make mistakes. But man, you can see them and you're walking through the halls and having a bad day and you just look for the good, and it's all around us. There's so much good around us. And I could talk about how, funding is scarce and how we're all terrified of what might happen if certain pots of funding get pulled. But the reality is, we will continue to show up for our kids and do what they need. And there's nothing that gives me more hope than just seeing them.
I love that. I love that. And listen, your building goes how you go. And I appreciate that you're bringing that. And I'll say from leading a company to leading a school building, it is lonely. It's a lot of pressure. And I thank goodness for my team as well, because that's what gives you the power to get up the next day, because you're all rowing the boat in the same direction.
That's right.
Well, Principal Chelsea Gallagher, thank you. I was so excited to have you on here. I appreciate the great conversation. Thank you to our audience. As always, if you enjoyed today's episode, please take a moment to share. Find more episodes at podcast.betterlesson.com. Chelsea Gallagher, thank you.
Thank you.
And that's a wrap. That wraps another episode of the Lessons Learned podcast. Thank you for listening. For show notes and more about Better Lesson, please visit betterlesson.com/podcast. Lessons Learned is hosted by Better Lesson, the leading provider of data-driven, high-impact, system-wide K-12 teaching and learning solutions. We partner with states and districts to support every educator in developing the next generation of resourceful, compassionate, and resilient learners who are college and career ready. Our work has impacted more than 80,000 educators and nearly 3 million students nationwide. See you in the next episode.